Um, my name is Sarah Clark. I am one of the co-directors of LEAP, the Leadership Equity Advocacy Project arm of MusicPortland. Um, OG and I are here today with all of you wonderful people. Our primary goal is to foster a healthy, thriving music community, BIPOC music community here in Portland. And as we've been digging into the best way to do that, we put out a survey a few months ago, and a lot of our survey responses were centered around just questions about some of the regulatory bodies within our local government. And so in our effort to get some of those questions answered and to make sure that we're all on a page and figure out the best way as we come out of this wild year of pandemic that we can foster a very healthy music scene for all people, we really wanted to bring some important voices in to the conversation to see what our steps are, and how we can work together to do this. We had a really, really wonderful conversation last month with Shannon and Stephen. And so we're building off some of that and bringing in some new guests. I'm going to toss it over to OG, and we can just kind of go around in a circle and introduce ourselves.
Yes. Well, again, thank you guys for coming on, everybody that's on here. I think, just kind of backing what Sarah said, this is really just, again, about ultimately building community and bridging some of those communication gaps, bridging some of the relational gaps, and kind of putting faces to agencies, because I think a lot of times in dealing with policies and relationships between, industries and agencies, we often lose the fact that, there are human beings operating in positions. And so, our goal is really just to kind of bridge those gaps and just kind of hopefully, get on this, the same page of support. Because I think in the bigger picture of things, everybody, no matter whether you're coming from an industry standpoint, community, agency, policy standpoint, I think the bigger picture, we all want a better Portland and a better functional Portland. We all want better community. So I think ultimately that's the goal. So how we get there, I believe that, the relationships, the conversations are the relationships. And so the more we're communicating and talking with each other and getting information and sharing, I think the more clarity comes to situations that's a lot easier to get to resolve when we're not left isolated to assume things about one another. So that's the ultimate goal. So those that might be tuned in that don't know me, I'm DJ OG1. I think my signage might say I am co-director of LEAP as well. And of course, I wear a lot of other hats in the community, but right now I'm representing MusicPortland's LEAP project. So I'm gonna hand it off to Eben.
Hey, I'm Eben Hoffer. I'm a member of the MusicPortland Policy Council. Dedicated nerd, friendly, helpful nerd for our, trying to get things working. And I'll pass it off to Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon Hoffetitz. I'm the Director of Statewide Compliance for the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, and I'm happy to be back for your second meeting and establishing this relationship and partnership that we are hoping on creating and building upon. So thank you for having us back. And I'll hand it off to Steve.
I'm Steve Marks, Executive Director of the OLCC. Glad to be back. Important conversation. And, we want everyone to be comfortable with our regulatory system, to understand it. And I think this is just the great opportunity to do that. OG and I were talking a little bit about my last few weeks working on this illegal hemp grows in Southern Oregon. And that was an exercise in getting people to understand one another. Now we got a pretty interesting bill coming out with a lot of strange allies working together in common cause. So hopefully we can get prepared to get past COVID and have a kind of a environment that people understand better and that we're participants in and help make work as we start to enjoy better days again. And I'll hand it off to Rob, and Shannon tipped me off to who you were. Very nice to meet you, Rob.
Oh, nice to meet you too. Yeah. My name's Rob Cruser, and I've been retired from the Fire Bureau for 4 years, but I spent 4 years as one of the public assembly inspectors for the Fire Bureau, and that's where a lot of folks in the music industry know me from. We were responsible for all the large events in town, everything from conventions and trade shows and street fairs to the Blues Fest, Rose Festival, basically any large event. My partner Michelle and I, we're doing plan review and approvals for. And one of our other duties, where folks in the music industry saw me, was every weekend. I worked nights, kind of in collaboration with the police entertainment detail and the OLCC inspectors, and we were just out there making sure that all the venues were following safe practices and building relationships with people. And kind of going back a little bit to what OG had to say here a second ago, I think is really important is communication. When people would ride along with me, sometimes they'd get a little bored because I spent so much time talking to people. And I said, I have a talking job. I'm out here, not only, not with the idea that I'm going to hammer somebody or I'm just on a scavenger hunt for a violation so I can write someone a ticket. It's, how can I help you be successful and safe? And, there were a few bumps in the road when I started with the, working with the police and the OLCC. And usually it came down to communication. And one person I really miss, and I wish she was able to be here today, was Star, because he's the one who really broke the ice. And, we all learned that just inviting the fire marshal to lunch can answer a lot of your questions and solve a lot of your problems. And, getting the facts rather than, continuing to kind of, roll around in the dark, with rumors and, kind of divisive attitudes. And I think people found that I wasn't, one of the nicknames I had was the Grim Reaper. And I kind of enjoyed that a little bit, but that's not really what I was about. And I knew in my heart that that's not what I was about. It was, I wanted people to be successful and I wanted them to be safe. And Star understood that, and I really miss him, and I wish he was here. So anyway, that's my little intro.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Yeah, I think it's important. The communication thing really rings a huge bell in my mind. I think that we identified in our last conversation that accessibility can be part of the problem, and I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on that tonight. But yeah, I think, OG, why don't you kick this whole conversation off with a couple, I don't know, we can start maybe with a little bit of background, and your history in working with these different entities and what has led you here today and all of us to this virtual space.
Yes, to what Rob said, I miss Star too, even though he got on my nerves at times, but I miss that part of him,
Family right there.
that iron sharpening iron aspect that he always brought to the table. But again, given a little history prior to LEAP, Star and I were very engaged in a lot of conversations with the city and fire marshals and police concerning just kind of a buildup of things that were going on in Portland. And again, for some of you guys that are tuning in, it had gotten to the point where it was just this feeling and that Portland as a city didn't want hip hop or events that were predominantly people of color in the city. And so I think that was the feeling. And so when certain things would happen in the city, uh, it would just always seem through that filter, whether it's interactions with police, whether it's venues being shut down, whether it's, conflict with OLCC, the perceived conflict, some of those things. And so he and I just got, really frustrated, and I think the incident that happened at Blue Monk was kind of like the straw that just, broke everything and brought it, just kind of to a blowing point, where the perceived feeling was that, okay, that this event, hip hop event, was targeted by the police. It was targeted by the fire marshal. They came and shut down the event. Nothing had happened. And that was it. And so statements were being made in the press that, certain performers weren't going to perform in Portland anymore until this issue was addressed. And so Star and I took on the task of saying, well, let's go find out what the real issues are. And so these conversations led to sitting down with various entities. And one of the things that we found very clear after, weeks of sitting down was that there was a gap in communication. There was a disconnect. There was a disconnect, from the hip hop community with the agencies. There was a disconnect between the agencies and the community. Nobody was talking to each other. And so no one was able to get anyone else's perspective except for their isolated perspectives. And so so having those conversations, and a lot of those conversations was very intense, very intense. And that's where, I met Rob and Shannon and some of them, and again, got to a chance to really build relationships with them and understanding. It was like, okay, well, it's not just one-sided. There's some things that were valid, some things that were just misperceived. Uh, and so we're here now. And so, there was a break for a while, and some things happened, me health-wise, Star, and, obviously passing away right after that. So things kind of shut down, but we're here now. And thank you to Music Portland, just kind of brought some things to light, and Leap was, brought into play and born. And so we're continuing, because I thought that was very, that period of time was very effective, because we were able to bring promoters and different people to the table and say, okay, how do we build, and bridge this communication gap? So one of the things today, and last month we wanted to do, Sarah and I, is started, bringing different entities that that really impact, our community's ability um, to operate, whether that's, operate in terms of how we think, or things that we think we can't do, things that we think we can do, perceived thoughts about who the OLCC is, what the fire marshal, what they're about. Is their intent to, just target people of color and people that are doing business, surrounding hip hop. So I thought, Sarah and I thought, well, the best way to do it is to bring people to the table, and let's have a conversation so we can see how we can figure this all out together. And Rob and I, again, Rob is, I consider Rob, not only a person that is a professional in the field that he's in, but just over the years of, again, having some of those conversations, I got a chance to know who he is beyond the position that he was in, and to know who he is as a person, and kind of his thoughts and feelings, both as a professional and personally. And so I really wanted to bring him to the table just to kind of inform people that are listening about what the role of fire marshal is, some of the challenges that he ran into while fulfilling his job, and where some of these perceived ideas that people have had. Where did he feel they came from, and what things were misunderstood, what things were valid. So that's where we are today. So I really wanted to give Rob a chance to kind of talk even a little bit more about his experience, particularly surrounding the hip hop community, and the dealings that some of the stuff he had to deal with. And we can use the Blue Monk as a great, I think, a great example of kind of what generally was going on.
Oh yeah, it's perfect. Do you want me to kind of
Let's do it.
give a little background on the monk and
Let's
what
do it.
happened? Because obviously I was there that night. That was
Yeah.
kind of the night that everyone in Portland learned my name. And so I had never even heard of the Blue Monk before that night. And when you talk about communication, if I had a time machine, when I got in the middle of it, I was wishing I could have gone back in time an hour. And I think we could have solved a lot of problems just with some communication before things got rolling. But I kind of got tossed like right into the middle of it when, and the unfortunate coincidence, I mean, it was a flashpoint, and sometimes those flashpoints are necessary to, bring about change, to motivate people to change, like we saw with, with George Floyd's murder last summer. The Blue Monk was kind of that kind of an event, and it fell closely on the heels of Michael Brown being shot in Ferguson, Missouri. And that was in 2014, that was the George Floyd of 2014. And that was not lost on me. And the police had called me kind of out of the blue and said that a couple of their guys had gone up there because one of the performers, Mikey Vegas, he was at a recording studio in Gresham a couple of weeks before, and he had been shot at. And so they were afraid that he could potentially be targeted. And so they had sent a couple of guys there, to have a presence or whatever. And they wanted me to go and just make sure, from my standpoint, that everything was safe and it was being run well and wasn't getting overcrowded and, or disorderly. And so I got there and talked to the owner. And as I was talking with her, I asked her, I said, so what's going on in the basement? I hear you got a show. I said, how many people can you have down there? And I said, I've never been here before, so just kind of educate me. And she said she didn't know. And here, she'd owned it for like 5 years or something. And she said she didn't know what her capacity in the basement was. And so about that time, one of her employees came running up the stairs and said, you need to have a look at the basement because it's getting crazy down there. And so obviously the hairs go up on the back of my neck now. It's like, what did I just step into? And I had to kind of fight my way down the stairs because they were selling tickets at the bottom of the stairs, which is always a bad idea. Just anyone who's listening who's going to have a basement event, sell your tickets at the top of the stairs and let them down one at a time. Don't let people wait in line on a stairwell. So I got to the bottom and it was pretty crowded. And I was looking around and we found an occupant load sign and it said 85. And it looked like a lot more than 85 in there. So I did a couple of quick counts walking through and walking back, and there were already 135 people down there. And plus about 20 on the stairs and plus about 20 out on the sidewalk waiting to get in. So they were 5 to 10 minutes from being like double their legal capacity. And so I remember my guts kind of running cold because, thinking, okay, I know how this is going to be perceived, but I've got to do my job because this is absolutely not safe, and I have to stop this and do this as gracefully as I can. So the first thing I did was I went up to the promoter and I said, well, for starters, you need to stop selling tickets right now. And I said, do you have any idea how many tickets you've sold? And he didn't. I said, do you have any idea how many people are supposed to be down here? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, here's the 411 on all of that. And so I told him, and I said, you need to have these people on the stairs go back upstairs. Okay, now people are starting to pick up on something's going on, and they don't understand what. All they see is the fire marshal and a couple of cops in the basement, and people are being turned away. And I know how all this looks, and I was just kind of bracing myself, for this bit of a storm. And people, were getting upset, and I could understand it, based on just the visuals and them not understanding, the technicalities of what's going on here. I got it. And so as people started to get upset, and outside people were mad and getting kind of loud, so the cops called for more cops, and a lot of cops showed up. And a lot of cops showing up at your show is definitely a buzzkill. And it's even more than a buzzkill, especially in a situation like this, given the context, say, of Michael Brown and the history of hip hop and the city of Portland. It was tough. I knew I had to do my job, but I was doing my best to explain to anyone who would listen, what was happening. But at this point, really, realistically, the show was ruined, and I knew that. We didn't shut the show down. What we said was, we're just going to hold it at 135, and if as soon as it drops down about its legal number, we'll start letting people in one at a time again. But the magic's kind of gone, really, at that point, and people are mad, and then the performers are upset, and nobody's going to have fun at that point. And so the perception was, we came swooping in and with no notice, and ruined the show. And it was just one more thing in a long history of the conflict with hip hop and the city of Portland. And it kind of officially kind of got declared the war on hip hop in Portland at that point. And there was tons of media attention. And the Fire Bureau did, I think, a really poor job of getting ahead of it. And it was 4 or 5 days before they even released the report I did. But by that time, it had gotten legs, and nobody was going to listen to that at that point, because all the other stories had gotten so much momentum that a report from me saying, well, you were almost double overcrowded and we didn't shut the show down, none of that mattered. And I can understand why. And then a couple of weeks later, the same promoter at Kelly's Olympian, and the rumor started going around that I had chopped the capacity in their music venue to 49 people, which wasn't true. It had always been 49. It had been 49 for at least 6 years when they got their occupant load sign. And they had actually gotten a ticket from me, several weeks before for having that room overcrowded. They got a $1,000 ticket. So they were well aware what their capacity was. And I was kind of mad at them because they let that narrative, grow some legs and didn't say anything. I think they were a little embarrassed, and the blame kind of fell back on me. And luckily this time the Fire Bureau did try to get the correct information out there. But still, by that time, technicalities just didn't mean a whole lot. It was how it felt to people. That was what's important. And I think that's what I really learned there was it's not just whether you're right or wrong, it's how it feels to the other person. And so anyway, so that's the background on that. And then I met Star shortly after that, and things slowly started to get better.
So with that, and just kind of Stephen and Shannon, like we were talking in the last month's meeting, now you see just from the story that Rob gave in terms of the different elements, whether it's the police and their end of things, where here it is, there was a shooting that happened, you know, at one of the performers. So that brings a certain energy and possibility of, you know, something potentially happening. So, you know, they're on guard. How many of the participants that went to the show knew that? So all they see is police showing up. Then you have, you know, Rob having to come do his job like, okay, man, there's a violation going on here. How do I, you know, come to some type of, you know, balance with this situation without it just super blowing up? So you got him, now you got the police, and then you have the performer that says, because of what's perceived, he says on the mic, the police and the city is trying to shut hip hop down. And he's a very influential artist. So he makes that statement. Everybody leaves out with that perceived, you know, idea of that's what happened. So you couple that in that incident, and then you have something now in that incident, you can see where the miscommunication or not enough communication was going on. And then when you have an incident that really does happen, where OLCC agent goes and tells a bar person, I wouldn't play hip hop here because if you did, it's going to bring unnecessarily attention to here. You got a lot of people, you know, people of color that's here. That's going to cause you some problem. Don't pour Hennessy after a certain amount of time because that gets them, that gets the element. So you got that is happening over here, a real incident, and then all that gets compiled to that one. And then it just starts building. All these stories, some valid, some not so valid, but there's no platform where you can come and get clarity on that. You know, where's the platform where you can just come and say, okay, hey, this look like this. What is the real deal? What is the information that I needed to know before I put that event on? Everybody's isolated, you know, and doing their jobs. Some trying to do a job, trying to do their job. Some of it is sometimes, you know, a owner that knows what the capacity is, but just ignores it because there's good money coming through the door. People are buying up drinks. And so when you, Rob or somebody has to come and show up and say, nah, we got to cut this, the owner is not going to make an announcement on the thing and say, you guys, I blew it. It was a 49 capacity situation in here and I knew it and I allowed it to happen. No, they're going to say the OLCC or the fire marshal came and shut it down. So where ends up being the accountability? And that was one of the things that Star and I wanted to get to, creating a platform where people can come and talk and we can find, you know, promoters can come and find out, okay, if I'm going to throw an event at the Blue Monk, what are the things I need to, that I need to know as I'm booking this event, whether it's what's the capacity, you know, what are the codes that I need to be clear about? If there is something going on in the community, be it shots and all that kind of stuff, is there a platform where artists or musicians or promoters can find out information to be aware of, you know, as they're booking? You say, I mean, it's not about profiling, it's just about being aware so you can have things in place. So in a perfect world, the promoter of the Blue Monk should have been able to have access to finding out from the city or whoever that entity is and saying, what's the capacity? I'm about to book this show. Should have a network or a relationship within the police department. Say, I'm about to do the show. Here's my lineup. Anything I need to know that's going on around in the community as I'm setting this up, not to necessarily curtail it, but at least have things in place to say that, okay, just be aware of this. Do you need us to come and do a walkthrough? You know, if something with OLCC gets out of line, who is it that I contact and say, hey, I felt like this was out of line or whatever, or you know, handled wrong. What is the level of accountability? That way, when things do happen, if or when they do happen, then we kind of get to it a lot faster than just kind of people again, being isolated and throwing people under the bus. It's not me. That's them.
On that
makes
topic of, sorry to interrupt, OG.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's sliding in there. I mean, on the topic of figuring out, capacity in venues, save going to the venue and finding the placard on the wall and reading it yourself. Is there a database of that information that people can access easily? Is that something that we could, if the need is there, maybe that's something that could be built out separately?
It would be nice if there was. There isn't that the public can get to anyway. But my old partner, Michelle Cofield, is still working. And the guy who took my job, Scott Holland, they're the two public assembly inspectors. And they do have a master list, of all the capacities in town that they can share with people. It would be great if you could get it out there. I think we had asked that be done so people could easily find out. And I think it was like computer compatibility problems or something. Believe it or not, the city does not always have the best equipment and most up-to-date stuff. It's the city that works, but yeah, it's really hard to get stuff like that done. One thing they did do after the Blue Monk and Kelly's Olympian is the Independent Police Review did an investigation, and I don't know how many of you have read their investigation. Oh, good. Yeah, good for you. Yeah. That's available online, and I think it's great, because they interview, people from the hip hop community. They go into tons of background, going back decades, and they talk to gang enforcement, the police entertainment detail. They did a ride along with me. They talk about the Blue Monk and the Kelly's Olympian thing in great detail. And so that is available online. And then what they recommended for the Fire Bureau after that is to just be more transparent about who we're inspecting and when, to show people that we weren't targeting any particular group. So starting in 2015, they started monthly putting out a whole list of all the, not only the night inspections that I would do, but all the other permit inspections that Michelle and I would do throughout the week, for other, large events. And so you can, we would probably average 30 night inspections a weekend. And it's like by name of the bar and address, you can see, who is being inspected every night, and they did that 2015, 16, 17, and then it started to taper off in 18. And then of course, 2020, there's nothing, because every place is closed. But so yeah, that was IPR's recommendation for us, is just to be transparent about where we are, and who we're visiting, so people can see if we actually are targeting, Black-owned businesses or hip hop shows. And we were way too busy, to target anybody, to be honest. And those reports kind of bear that out, because we were all over town, from North Portland to 148th and Stark. We had some problem places out in East County. And on the weekends, we only had, 6 or 7 hours a night to cover the entire city. And so it's interesting to, go through them. I've been going through them the last couple of days, just to prepare for this. And it just kind of drove home that, no, we were everywhere, the Fire Bureau anyway. I won't presume to speak for the cops and their policies or how they went about. And I don't know if you want to have one of the folks maybe from the old entertainment detail on, maybe OG, you and I could talk about maybe some ideas for who would be a good person to bring on to talk about that. But yeah. So anyway, yeah, Evan.
What, as a famed reader of this document, which is the IPR report is super, super readable. It's like,
Yeah.
it's very like, you can open it up, crack it up like a novel, which is great. And it's really encouraging the steps that y'all took at Portland Fire and Rescue to really lean into that kind of transparency, so folks can understand what's going on. And that, you know, it is notable that that hasn't happened everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of great that we're in this room together also, because that's something that we've often wondered about OLCC inspections, and if a certain amount of transparency about where folks are going to. I know that that's something that you all do for minor decoy operations. You can look up that stuff, but you know, there's other forms of inspections that it's difficult to know who's going where, and there's suspicions about those things. I think that's something to really lift up and share.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, towards the end of my career, you know, people will always, like OG was saying, everyone wants to shift the blame, you know, for their mistakes. And a lot of people would assign like personal vendettas or something to the enforcement people. It's like, you're only here because you don't like me because I'm Black or I'm gay or whatever. And I heard that constantly. And so one of my last nights out, about a month before my retirement, there was a place in Southeast Portland that was double overcrowded. I mean, it was extremely overcrowded, and it had never been before. It was kind of a one-off type thing, and it was all gay men. And so I went in, I told the owner, I said, I think this is beyond saving. You're going to have to start turning the lights on and flushing people out of here, because this is dangerous. And a good friend of mine was one that was in there. You know, he was one of the patrons, and he came out and gave me a big hug on the sidewalk, and he and I talked for a while. And so then I was approached by somebody with a camera, and the guy said, okay, well, have you guys done any enforcement on any non-gay bars tonight? And so after 4 years of hearing this kind of stuff, and I'm only a month out, and so I go, nope, only gay bars. We've been instructed by the mayor's office to only enforce against gay bars and to try to shut them down at every opportunity. And he's got his camera, and he was not expecting to hear that. And he was a little drunk, so I think he thought I was serious. And I was expecting to get a call from the chief on Monday morning when I went to work, you know, about my comments. But that was just kind of an illustration. People always think, well, the only reason you're here is because of this, because you dislike me for this reason, and rather than you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting space. I mean, because I've seen a bit of that just in general, just in life, not in obviously in your situation by any means, but I do think that, you know, a lot of those feelings do come from very valid places of being, like, whether it's being targeted by you know, government entities, maybe, or just by people that, you know, are around you, or feeling like there's, like, you know, that target on your back, is something that I think that the LGBTQIA community and the BIPOC community share. And then it's, you know, I think that being that it is so, I believe, prevalent in our society, that those things, you know, that they happen daily to people.
Yeah.
Again, whether it's, I'm not necessarily saying it's like happening daily from like a government standpoint. I think it happens daily just in general, just like in the way that people function in their lives, that it must, I mean, I've found it hard to turn that off. And so that's it's an interesting point, because I think it's just it's interesting commentary on the difficulties that we deal with as people, when you know, bigotry does exist and people have faced that, and then feel that, you know, that, I don't know, it's like an armor, you know, you kind of put up the moment that someone approaches you. So it's interesting, because I agree that I can't imagine that. I mean, the joke of like the mayor sent me out to like do this thing, I mean, is probably lost in that context.
Yeah,
But
he was drunk, you know, and everybody else was fine. You know, there were smiles, even though the bar was being shut down. Everybody else was smiling. They knew, everybody knew, and he was just kind of one cranky person, and I guess I was just a cranky fire marshal that night. And but
all
no,
human.
but like what you're saying is you look at things through a filter, and OG, you talked about that earlier, and especially when you have an emotional element to that, you know, where maybe your whole life has been, you know, has been living with that kind of discrimination, and so you have an instant reaction, you know, and that's the first thing that your heart tells you when something happens like that is, here it is again. And it's not something you can even control. It's not something that is even at your it works at the logical level. It's at a gut level, but it does, those emotional reactions override everything else initially. And I learned that over, you know, especially after the Blue Monk, you know, I did a lot of, you know, that really made me look at how I was approaching situations and how it was going to be perceived. And I don't know, I think people, for the most part, believe it or not, liked me. So, you know, I still hang out with, you know, some of the security guards, you know, from downtown, and good friends with some of them still, and even guys I've written tickets, you know, tickets to them. You know, it cost them a lot of money, and we still joke about it. But I think they knew that, you know, my heart was in the right place, and I was just trying to make sure everybody was safe. And so, and that was one of the, for me, that was one of the ultimately satisfying things about the job, is feeling like, you know what, I treated people fairly. You know, they may not have always liked having to pay that ticket, or they didn't like maybe that one time where the bar had to get emptied out and your night kind of got disrupted. But you know, I tried to go way out of my way to be fair and helpful, and catch people doing the right thing, you know, 20 times before you catch them doing a wrong thing. You know, same thing with parenting. You know, that's kind of how I looked at it. I was like, I was the dad out there, and I did a lot more back patting than I did scolding. And I think the fact that you know, things started running very smoothly after a year and a half or so, showed that there was buy-in, you know, from the bar community at that point. And they knew that I was out there every weekend. It showed that I cared about them. And so anyway.
I see Evan's hand up. You want to pop in for a sec?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. You know, it seems like the practices that you're describing, you have a very particular way that you learned about going about the work you did, to be methodical, respectful, person first, and figuring out solutions. You know, and that strikes me as, you know, a body of knowledge that's built over time, and it gives me questions about how that's codified, shared, taught to other people who are working in this way. You know, just for folks in the room, I wonder about your opinions on that kind of training and on standard operating procedures, written standard operating procedures in general, if that is a useful way of going about those things and building trust.
What do you think, OLCC guys?
Shannon, you hopping in here? I will. So I'll, you know, my experience on standard operating procedures is bars generally, right? And a lot of it has come out of, I mean, we've gone through, I keep talking about this evolution of us beginning to regulate marijuana, which was really challenging. We didn't know a lot about it. We had to rely on the community to get us there. But, you know, when you start off a program like that, you can't. We couldn't keep up with the knowledge based on the regulations that we were putting in place concurrent with licensing establishments. So it's all rolling together, very new. And, you know, the importance of us getting consistency as a statewide regional enterprise, really hard. And I've been around state government a long time. And I can tell you the regions always have difficulties with headquarters. It's a typical kind of event, right? And what I really respect is from our public safety office and Shannon's work and Rich Evans and the folks that are in that, how much time they actually spend getting the consistency in place and making that work inside that program. So I think that's right. It's vitally important to fairness. You got to try to get your knowledge base concurrent. You got to have the support to do that training. In the end, though, I think there's a lot about people's intrinsic judgments, right? Who they are, what they bring to the job, to be able to operate there, to be able to have those skills to diffuse and communicate intense, you know, in intense situations. And there's no doubt the training, the standard operating procedures, all of that is really crucial to what our public safety inspectors do in the world. You know, I'm not sure I could do that job, but the people that do, I've always been impressed with the amount of work they try to get consistent. Now, that doesn't mean you achieve it, right? But to the extent that we've done it in marijuana, I think that there's some instructive lessons there about not just what the agency brings to standing operating procedures, but, you know, we had to educate concurrently at the same time. Ourselves as our licensees, we're learning the same things at the same time. And I think maybe this experience that we're trying to create here is a little bit of that, right? It's like how we do things together at the same time to relearn them, learn them, so people can end up in compliance, end up safe, have safe events. So been on a bit, but it's, I think Shannon, I was getting ready to kick it over to Shannon.
Yeah.
She actually does that work of making that training concurrent.
Yeah, I think the hiccup is that a lot of our training is directly with the bar and the business owners, because that is who holds the license with us. And so the entertainers and the musicians and the folks that come into the businesses that have the contracts to come in and do the work and to do the performances, we don't communicate with them because that's not, we haven't, because the folks that our responsibility really, you know, we work with the licensees. So, I mean, that's part of bridging the gap, and why we're here today is because we want to open those lines of communication and open those doors. And I think that's really what it has been missing. One of the things that I do want to stress is that a lot of the work that we do is educational. Over half of the work that we do is educational. Like Rob, we're not out there trying to find violations. We're out there making sure the train is running down the track straight. You know, if it's not something super serious, we make the corrective action. We talk with them. It's called verbal instructions, and we go on our way. You know, I have this saying to the inspectors and the folks out in the field that if a licensee receives a violation, it should not be a surprise to them. Because of the amount of work that we've put into the education and the work that we do in talking with them about the public safety concerns that we have at the businesses. And so with that, you know, I'm going to kind of explain what our processes are. We have, when a business is licensed, the license investigator is the one that actually issues the license. They let the licensees know when they receive a license that an inspector will be visiting their location in the next 90 days to introduce themselves and to talk about things, answer any questions, and to establish that relationship with the licensee. And so then when, you know, the phone call comes or there is a visit by that inspector later on down the road, they know who that person is and they have that established rapport. And I'm not saying that if an inspector visits a location during that first 90 days and there's a minor drinking at the bar, I mean, we're not going to like turn a blind eye and look the other way. But that is the whole purpose of us going out there within the first 90 days, establishing that relationship, leaving the business card. And I can also tell you, we're not out there looking for violations. We are primarily complaint driven. We just don't have the manpower to go out there and be visiting. We're trying to do inspections as we can, but COVID has really kind of stopped that. And we're hoping to be able to go out and not only do first call inspections, but go out and do other inspections and make sure that everybody is following the rules that they can. But like I said, we are primarily complaint driven, and we're just not out there trying to find things. And again, I also want to stress that, you know, our relationship currently, and that why we're here is because we want to improve on it, is with the licensees and the folks that have those licenses. And so I think if we can help expand our communication to the non-licensees that are performing in those businesses, I think that can kind of help for the good of the order, so to speak. I know that there was some discussion last time about how can minors perform inside businesses. I think that was a topic of discussion that you guys were interested in hearing about. And it is possible, but it's really up to the business owner as to whether or not they want to permit that to occur. And if they want to permit that to occur, they simply work with their district inspector to meet the, they have to submit a request and get approval for that to happen. And I'd be happy to send the link. I'll send it to David so that he can have the information to share with everybody, the rule that permits that to happen. And so I don't, you know, what's interesting is I don't even know if people knew that that was a possibility, but it truly is, because we do think that, you know, we want to help promote the younger artists, and you know, there's not a lot of places around to do that. And so we recognize that, and we do actually have an administrative rule. There are some criteria that needs to be met, and the licensee is ultimately responsible, but there is a way to make that happen.
Is it
Awesome.
too much to elaborate a little bit, just because I'm actually just burning with curiosity about what some of those steps would be for licensees to allow minors to perform in those spaces?
Yeah, so they have to put the request in writing to the district inspector, and then there's a form that they can fill out. And it's they just have to, basically what we want to make sure of is if it's a location that no minors are permitted, we want to be sure that when the minor's performing, that's fine, that's one thing. But when they're not performing, where are they going to be in the premises? What is that designated area to ensure, and what are the steps to ensure that they don't receive alcohol? And that can either be somewhere, like the most common location is like a dressing room or the green room. It's like the green room is going to be designated no alcohol. And so the minor can go in there, stay while they're not performing. So they're either on stage performing or in that area.
Great. And so, I mean, just like for my clarification, that just essentially means that there does have to be like a space with walls, not just like a table in the corner of the venue, that, or like or is it?
You know, I'd have to make sure the rules haven't changed, but I do think that there can be a designated space as well. The other thing is that, you know, there have been like some folks that travel around in a like RV or a motorhome. They're either on stage or they're out in a safe area in the motorhome, or, you know, people are creative. And, you know, I like to think that we try to figure ways out to make it happen, and we will do everything that we can to really work on a safe environment for the minor and work with business owners to help make that happen.
That's great. I think, I mean, a lot of, I mean, what I keep hearing, and what I think there's like some spaces, you know, when we're talking about like capacity for venues, where that information isn't as readily as accessible. And then there's some situations where it seems like the information is out there, but just nobody knows that it's out there to go find it. And it really, for me, excites me to give, it's like a little project, you know, that maybe OG and I can take on, or I don't want to speak for him, I know he's really busy. But you know, to kind of compile that information in a space that is accessible to artists and venue owners, and you know, and then helps us complete our mission of supporting the BIPOC community in that way as well. But so yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. That was just a curiosity that I
Yeah,
had.
I'll actually drop I'm looking at it right now. I'll drop the rule in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask this question, Shannon, just for the record, to say that in terms of, you were talking about the inspection and some of the dialogue that agents go and have with venue owners or whatnot, bar owners or whatnot. Just so it's clear, none of the conversation should center around a genre of music as a
Absolutely not.
stipulation for getting licensing, nor should it center around a particular group of people in order for license, or in order for consideration for licensing and, you know, permits and so forth.
Yeah, I do not care what type of music a business plays. I could care less. I just want to be sure that the rules are followed and that people are safe. I have said that. David and I go back a long time, and I have said that from day one.
You know,
Real quick, I wanted you to say that because again, I'm often found in spaces where I'm saying that, and a lot of times I'm saying that based off of those meetings we sat in and hearing it straight from you guys. And so, you know, I think sometimes again it just kind of like, oh well, yeah, that's OG saying that, you know, but people being able to hear that straight from you guys, again, to me, at the end of the day, you know, I want people, you know, particularly our people, to feel empowered, to know that, and not having to feel isolated if they run into a situation where that becomes part of the dialogue and they feel powerless. They feel like, okay, there's no way they can hold an agent accountable that might say, yeah, I wouldn't play hip hop in here, you know, I would kind of, you know, be careful with who you let, you know, if, you know, about letting what they call the element in, which is basically say black and brown people, you know, I don't want them to feel like, okay, well, I have no voice in this matter because they've lumped it with somehow with OLCC rule or fire marshal rules and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I wanted you to say that.
Yeah, I would say that if anybody hears that, I oversee the inspectors statewide, and Steve Marks is my boss. If anybody hears of that happening, please reach out to either Steve or myself.
yeah, I mean, I would every once in a while, for a while there was, and I think there still is to some degree, perception that there's possibly a bigger conspiracy in the city, you know, against hip hop. And tell you what, I was all right in the middle of all that, and I can say that that's not the case. There were like isolated individuals, and not even individuals who had that much influence, where you would hear things and you just cringe, you know, and go, that's an ignorant individual. But as far as like a citywide conspiracy, no, I never saw any evidence of that. And there was a couple of gals who worked on the entertainment detail, the police entertainment detail. One night they took the night off to go see a hip hop show, and they didn't hate hip hop, they took a vacation day to go see a hip hop show. And then, one of my proudest moments, and OG, I know you'll remember this, I think we've talked about it, is you and Star, doing that show at Holocene one night. And me and my partner were doing a walkthrough, and I looked up at the stage and waved at you guys, and Star jumped down off the stage and came over and gave me a hug. And he called me the next week, and he said, "You would not believe how much static I am getting from people, because I hugged the enemy, in front of all of them." And I was still, several years down the road, I was still perceived that way. And Star was, he was a special person. He was brave, and he was, I just had world of respect for him. And he wanted to know what the facts actually are, and he wanted to know, if there was talk about a certain person, he would go and meet the person. He wasn't shy. He'd go find out for himself and make his own judgment, rather than rely on rumors. And I'll never forget that. But that just always makes me think, I was doing some stuff right.
I think
Yeah.
I really am struck by what you're saying about, well, first, I think that story of Star jumping off the stage and hugging you is great. And I feel like that type of imagery is really important for the communities to be able to heal and work together properly. I did want to, touch a little bit on I think the problem is when maybe it's not a conspiracy, but if there are, a few bad apples out there that are saying and doing ignorant things in representation of governmental, bodies or whatever, that if there isn't very transparent accountability there for those people, then that's, I think, where some of that conspiracy talk comes into play, because what is perceived then is that they're being allowed to do this, and that's their bosses allowing them to do that, and that's the government or whatever, And so I think that one of the things that, I will always be an advocate for, and I, even in the conversations that our nation is having with, violence against the Black community and police officers and all that stuff, it's, the accountability has to be there, and that's how you can diffuse those other conversations. If people see that if someone calls me a bad name, or kills somebody for no reason, or whatever's happening there, that they are held accountable for that, then I feel like the community feels a lot safer and a lot less like there's some grand conspiracy. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep, great point.
Yeah, I see. Well, before
Yes.
I ask that question, because I see someone, Andre has a question I want to make sure that we get to. One of the things you said, Rob, and I think is very, very accurate, very true, even up to having this meeting, was that, again, there's that residue that's still there. And I think, as we are, things are starting to open up, from this pandemic and stuff, I think it's really important that we are doing this type of work. And I think it's very important to be able to continue to create a platform where people can come to get answers to questions and perceptions and kind of bring things to reality again, because it's very easy to kind of build this story when you're in isolation and there's no one there to challenge your way of thinking. And I think that, I've seen that happen on both sides. I've seen that happen on the police end of things where, just a simple thing of, hey man, you're showing up to an event and you have your sirens going on, you have your lights going on, and they're not doing anything but just to come and check on things, but just being aware that just having your lights on creates an energy, that creates an energy with people and their perception. So being aware of those things, but that happened from having dialogue. And so again, I'm hoping that these type of dialogues, that we can come to a place where simple things like what you and Shannon have said, Stephen, is that, you know, if these things happen, here's the process. That became a clear process of accountability. Hey, if you run into agents that are, you know, you feel as doing things that are not a part of their, you know, job, then let us know. Prior to, you know, this, it wasn't that, you know, or people didn't know that they had that access. You see what I mean? If they weren't a part of the process. So having this, I think the same thing for, you know, fire marshal department. I think the same thing for, obviously, for the police department, being able to have, you know, a process of accountability where people feel like their voices are validated, you know, and that, you know, their voices are important. And I think, you know, in all fairness, it's the same thing on our end, you know, because part of that process that, you know, that we were going through initially, you know, things came out about, you know, there was promoters that were doing janky things, you know, and it was very easy to throw it on, you know, the fire marshal and OLCC, when no, you were doing some crappy stuff, you know. And so I think it's just as important, you know, those that know me know I'm not a one-sided situation. You know, I want to speak truth on both ends of it. So if, you know, that's a way, if, you know, you guys are setting a process on how we can hold your agencies accountable, it has to be equal on the other end, you know. But I think part of that is people being able to come to these types of tables and getting to know the individuals behind the titles, and understand that at the end of the day, again, we want our city to be better. We want our city to be safe. We want people to do good business. You know, I'm assuming the business of integrity. And so if that's the common goal, then it shouldn't really be that hard to get to a common place of understanding and support and resolve surrounding some of these issues. Even leading up to this situation, I had someone hit me in a DM about you, Rob. And they say they want me to jump on your head. So they said, "Oh, is this the same Rob that, you know, came and stood in the DJ booth and took money out of my pocket?" And I asked, "Well, how did he do? How did he intimidated me?" And in my mind, the first thing I thought, you know, okay, well, he's doing a head count, and the DJ booth is in a great position to oversee the dance floor. But to that person, again, because they haven't been in these type of dialogues and they haven't got a chance to know who you are, their assumption was automatically that he's coming to disrupt my business. You know, he's taking money, you know, out of my pocket. And so I challenged that person again to come, you know, their opinion was very important. I told them that your opinion and your perception, whether it's real or not, is still important, but you don't get a chance to, you know, get answers to those questions or those perceptions if you don't come to the table.
Yeah.
So again, I appreciate you guys coming to the table and are willing to answer some of those questions. I see Andre has a, go ahead.
Yeah, we didn't always know how we were coming across a lot of times. We were just doing our jobs, and I don't even remember that circumstance. I mean, but you're right. I would always look for the best, you know, vantage point to be able to count. Some of those rooms are hard to count, and so sometimes I just let myself in wherever. And so yeah, tell him I'm sorry. I scared him, and I meant no harm.
Most definitely.
I know we have a
Yeah.
couple, oops, sorry.
That's okay. I was going to answer Andre's question.
Yes.
Yeah, he wanted to know what kind of continuing education is available to venue owners and their staff regarding safety issues. And I'm assuming these regulations are online, but are licensees subject to annual or multi-year certifications? So to answer that, licenses have to be renewed every year. And so if there is a series of series of serious incidents. We look at that as a history of serious and persistent problems. And what we can do and what happens is if their license is being ready, is in the timeline of renewal, and the case is over in our administrative hearings division, and a charge list issue.
Oh no.
In the meantime, though, before it ever gets to that point, we like to think that we work with businesses. We, before it ever gets to that point, our hope is that we have training classes with them. So for example, if we have a business that has like, gosh, let's just say they have 50 reports of driving under the influence, and the last location they came from was, I'm just going to throw Blue Monk out there. The inspector, we may not be able to prove that that's where the folks came from or that they were actually overserved at the Blue Monk, but the inspector will go talk with the business owner or the manager, explain to them, remind them of the laws and rules regarding overservice, and then say, hey, look, these are all happening on a Friday and Saturday night. Let's pull together your serving staff and let's have a training. And so then we'll have a training on ID checking, over service. And if there's like reports of fights and whatnot, we will tailor the classes and the education for what those issues are that are reported to us. And the goal is, it never rises to the level of us having to write a violation for history, which is one of the most serious cases that an alcohol business can receive. But the goal is for them not to even rise to that level. So I hope that helps answers Andre's question.
Shannon, let me ask you a question because it was something that popped in my mind as you were explaining that. So as it relates to the reports in some of those incidents, are those reports primarily coming from community, police, fire marshals, or a mix of them all?
It's a mix of them all. We receive, so I like to say that we receive complaints from a variety of different sources. Individual complaints, we have employees that complain, we have competing businesses that complain, we have the police that will forward some reports to us, and we have our local businesses that that we work with that will provide information to us as well. So it's not just the police, it's a wide variety of things. And when I say, when we received Dewey reports, there's actually a state law that says if there is a Dewey report, the police agencies will forward that report to OLCC.
Thank you. I know Eben has a couple questions. Do you want to pop in here?
Sure, just some things that have come up a few times from in the world. Does OLCC respond to noise complaints? And if so, how?
You're muted, Steve. Do you want me to take it?
Let me start and then I'll have you take it. But I came in at that. I had some experience actually when I worked in the legislature for the governor on noise complaints from Portland, where it was like, I think it was the old Paragon, where they had built the condos up above and there was a dispute and the bar down below was really upset because it was mixed use and there was noise, right? The residents upstairs didn't like the noise from the bar down below. And, the city's ordinance, the mixed use zone, right, sort of established that there'd be some mix of noise in that area when you create a urban environment like that. So, what I always say today, and I came up here, so I had that experience of that issue and watching that get fought through between restaurant association and the landowners and the bar. When I got here, people were talking about how noise was still, and what I say on those violations is where we got to as a policy under Chairman Rob Patridge is you lead, we'll follow. So local, if the local jurisdiction writes the noise complaint, right, then we'll pay attention to the noise complaint if they uphold it. but we don't regulate the noise ourselves. So that's a kind of example. So on the municipal stuff, they lead, we follow. We will support their actions if they take the violation initiative. But ourselves, it's a situation where we're not need on that. It's a factor in our regulatory mosaic, and we regulate maybe based on those things and findings as there's too much noise. And a lot of times that'll go into the plans to keep them in business, a compliance plan where you're regulating maybe the hours of things and performances and otherwise. Shannon, go ahead and you can make me accurate on that part there, what we do with on our side.
You did a really good job. So City of Portland, they have a noise ordinance policy and a noise office. And so if we receive noise complaints, I'm just going to flat out say we are not the expert. So we do rely, and if we do receive noise complaints, we refer them to the City of Portland. We will, if we are at a business and we're like 2 blocks away, if we show up, we may say something to the licensee. It's like, hey, I can, I just parked by some houses and I can hear the music from, 2 blocks away. You may want to think about turning it down a little bit, but we can't and we won't do anything about it. And we can't. Our policy is that in cities that have a noise ordinance, that means that there's theoretically somebody there to regulate it. We will not take action on those cases. We'll be maybe witnesses if we experience something, but we do not regulate them.
Follow-up question, in the case of a local violation, you will then regulate them in addition?
Yeah, so if there's a violation of a noise ordinance, we'll evaluate it and then determine, does it violate, so once it's adjudicated and they are found essentially guilty through the city, then we will look at taking action, writing a violation against their liquor license.
And if in the event that there is such a violation and you were to do this, does that need to be related strictly to people drinking and alcohol sales, or is live music also included?
No, I mean, it can be any noise complaint. It does not have to be, if there is a noise complaint and there's a liquor license, if the licensee is found guilty, then we will go behind them. There does not have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be music. And then to answer the question, if there is no LLCC license, then we just simply are not involved. We don't have any administrative authority at all if there's no license.
Eben, what agency would address the noise complaint then? Would that be the Noise Bureau or Noise Office?
Well, this is something that we're working on here in Portland, but because it sort of depends on what time of day you call. Phone calls during the day tend, again, depending on who you call, tend to go to Portland's Noise Office, which is in the Office of Community and Civic Life. And we have a local title that's associated with that. Phone calls during the evening tend to go to the police non-emergency line. And in a funny way, in Portland, the police actually have a separate noise code, which is totally separate from the noise office, that adjudicates loud noise and also amplified equipment, which has some different standards. I personally find that confusing, so I'm hoping that we can get that sorted out, just so it's easier for the community to understand what it means to be doing the right thing. So one of those two things will happen, and then and those can come from neighbor complaints or from from a couple other sources too.
Thank you for answering that. Evan, did you have any more questions? I know you said you had a couple, or did you cover all your?
Yeah, just a couple more. Thanks, everybody.
While we're here, we appreciate it.
There's a question for, these are related questions, but another question for Shannon is, You did mention that there are, if somebody does apply for a minor permit, that there, so you apply for that thing, and then you have to do certain things to make sure that the minor is safely separated from alcohol, right? So that they don't get hurt. And you offered a link for the code that tells you about that application process. Is there a publicly available place where folks can know what the compliance plans for actually keeping the minors separated are? Is that written down anywhere where people in the community can see it? Oh, sorry, I think you might be muted.
Right now there isn't. And the reason I say that is because each business operation is uniquely different. And so, like I said, we really like to think that we want to try to make it work. And so what may work for Steve Marks's business might not work for my business, might not work for Rob Cruser's business. So we can tailor for your specific business. I'm not saying, most of these are approved, but not all. There are some that are pretty unrealistic, but I like to think that we like to work with businesses to be able to get those minor musicians in there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A related question for Rob. One thing that we hear often from folks out in the community, this is one of those things where like somebody runs into trouble and it often quickly feels motivated for, racially motivated or motivated by gender identity or sexuality,
Sure.
et cetera, is not understanding why certain, what's the word I'm looking for, public assembly codes are being utilized or what the dependencies are. Now, I'd say for myself, after being somebody who's worked in live performance for 15 years on the back end side of things, you start to have a sense of what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a single place where a person who hasn't encountered these things can go and find out what's right and what's wrong in Portland?
You know what? Unfortunately, not really. I mean, businesses that get regular, fire inspections, like a formal fire inspection, they have some resources where you can kind of prep yourself a little bit. Like, here are some common violations that you can work on cleaning up, before we show up. But as far as what I did at night, it's actually fairly simple. It's like, capacity, blocked exits, and then anything grossly unsafe, from a fire standpoint that I think any reasonable person would probably, be able to figure out. But no, they never really put out anything.
Like a checklist or something?
No, there wasn't really a checklist, no. And I was definitely an advocate for that, like warning people in advance. After I'd been doing it a year or two and knew everybody, it was just by, me being there all the time that everybody knew, what was expected of them. And if I would go to a new place that I hadn't been before and I spotted some things, then it was just educational. I just took that as an opportunity to educate them at that point. We wouldn't write a violation, first time at all. It's like, hey, you guys probably didn't realize this, but you can't, I know you want to, hide this exit door so people don't sneak out before they pay their bill. But if people don't know how to get out the exit, then that's bad from my standpoint. So you have to come up with some kind of a solution like alarming the door. I would help them figure out a way to solve the problem, solve both problems, my problem and their problem. So when I was doing it, it was mostly just me, me and my partners educating.
Does your type of work get, are there things like, like the type of light bulb that you can use, or like the length of the curtains that you have on your windows? Are those also things that can contribute to challenges for business owners? And is that stuff?
Oh, yeah. Like curtains. Yeah. Because in an assembly, they have to be fire treated. And so a lot of people go, hey, I got this really great deal, at IKEA on these curtains, and then you like cut off a piece and you set a match to it, and it just explodes. And so they've just wasted all that money on curtains.
I remember the candle test,
Yeah,
the four,
yeah,
the 4
So-
or 5 second rule.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, for a while there was a deal, and it was really cool looking, where if people would buy a bottle of something for their birthday, they would bring out this a cork that had this like sparkler that would just spray sparks everywhere. And as neat as that looked, in a big crowd of people, yeah, that's not a great practice.
I
So
use a
we
lot of
kinda-
hairspray, so it's very personally dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
I see that going.
So what you're saying, Rob, is what I be seeing on TV with them with the bottle with the sparkler, that's not the, oh man,
No, man, nope. I'd be writing you a ticket for that.
oh man, you're ruining my celebrations, man.
It is that kind of thing that maybe is that's not necessarily easily accessible for new business owners to find out.
No.
So they
no,
kind of
no.
it's kind of a trial and error. I want it's like that. Yeah, I'm glad that you advocated for that, for having those types of checklists in your time there. I wonder what it would take to get that conversation going, because it seems like a lot of these things and just even points of contention that can exist between these groups and the people that are trying to operate their businesses, it could be really easily taken care of if the people knew what to do to fall into line, to do the right thing on their own, and could do their
Right.
best.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's worth reiterating. I know this came up in the chat earlier. I think it was Andre that, what's the right word for it, but in the context of, a real history of city and state repression and, going back decades, that, relying on encounters with basically law enforcement personnel of various kinds, regardless of how charming and nice and well-spoken they are, can bring stress into the situation. And so thinking about those ways to give people the tools to feel prepared and not surprised is a really, it's a good thing to be thinking about. I don't know, maybe I'm freelancing here, but.
Oh, I've got a lot of cop friends, and I still get nervous when I'm approached by a cop that I don't know. A lot of my cop friends, like who worked on the entertainment detail, a lot of them are really nice and really, fun-loving people. And there's one in particular who would dress up every holiday. She would dress up, and she would have, all sorts of, crazy hair and makeup and everything for every holiday. And she said that she would forget that she was wearing a cop uniform, because that's just what they put on to go to work. And then it kind of normalizes for them, and they don't always think about the little emotional reaction that people have when a cop walks into the business, wearing the bulletproof vest and pepper spray and guns and sticks, and it is intimidating, but some of them truly, have to be reminded that how that feels to people. And that's why I always insisted on wearing plain clothes when I was working. There were some folks in the fire department who thought that, we should be wearing uniforms out at night. And I thought, no, I want to be as unobtrusive as possible. I don't want to disrupt. After a while, everybody figured out who I was, just from seeing me around all the time. But adding a uniform to that equation always, to me, I thought it would be counterproductive. To just try to make them feel safe when I showed up, and safe to ask me a question or bring something up that might have been hard to talk about. But if you have a uniform on, it kind of can create a little bit of a barrier sometimes, and I didn't want to do that.
My last question, if there is in fact a pattern, so in the context of a lot of these things, references or complaints do come from police, right? As well as from neighbors, and, these complaint-based systems to some degree are vulnerable to different people's ideas about, as OG says, the element, right? To discrimination. So if a venue owner does have the experience of receiving more attention when they're serving Black and brown clientele, is that, if they can demonstrate that, is that considered a meaningful defense if they end up in an arbitration situation or being slapped with violations? Is that a thing that y'all do or are aware of and think of?
No, what I would want to make sure of is that the business was treated fairly, and what was the reason for the inspector going there? Were they following up on a complaint? What did they see that made them go to the business? Those would be all things that I would want to make sure that was happening. I don't, honestly, it doesn't matter to me, like the music. I don't care what music is played, and I don't care who the patrons are. I just want to make sure that the licensee and their employees are following the rules. And then for an inspector, if it just depends on what their reasoning is for being there. Are they following up on a complaint? Did they get a police report that they were following up on, or what was the reason for being there? I hopefully that helped answer your question.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure, Evan, but last time I think we talked a little bit about the problem drinking areas, and you could look at the crime stats around, right? There's things we look at in totality in some of those areas, and that, we talked about whether that could be systemic or not. The one thing I want to introduce here with the pressure, the pressure's on us to do better with the community, to educate it, to pull it together. I think I had a couple of questions here. Who are the examples that are doing right? Who's in the community? I mean, there's a lot of savvy, important people in the community that understand these things, right? And can help us make it work. The other thing that I wanted to bring an awareness of is, there is a lot of focus in Oregon on, from Oregon Recovers, right, on the spike in alcoholism and problem drinking and the effects that it has on people's lives now. We're an alcohol agent, we sell alcohol, we price alcohol, but it rolls downward to how do we perform, what kinds of standards we get that are more limiting to perform our work, right, in the area of commerce. And it's a trend, right? And in the state and even within the alcohol industry itself, right? They're looking for, you're looking at healthier alcohols, low calorie alcohols, buying better, drinking up, drinking more. And it's just I wanted to just introduce that because there's this other factor about protecting people, right, where they drink. And that's a larger one coming up more recently. You had Measure 110 that supported all the treatment. We legalized, recreational marijuana, which we're happy to regulate, but, change there. So a lot of change in this space, and in our context, I'm paying a lot of attention now. We do a health impact analysis when we do our work and look at policies. And I just want to say there's a relationship across the spectrum, right, on those issues. So we got to be cognizant of that. I was listening to the radio yesterday afternoon. I was going to meet a legislator, and it was like, oh, and Saturday night's coming up. And what happened? No, the weekend's coming up. What happens on the weekend? Drinking, and it's like, yeah, we do kind of celebrate that. We have fun, and we want those businesses to go forward, right? The world and environment's changing around us a little bit right now, so we just need to be cognizant of that. But I was actually wondering, are there examples of people in this work we're doing together here where we would, want to step up or tell us what they're doing and what's working right out there? Because my experience with most enterprises of most any time, most people are all trying to do the right thing. You got 80% hitting it all the time. And I got 10% that miss a little bit. corrective action, and maybe 10% of the systems just kind of as a number where you got problems, right? They keep happening again and again with some folks, and ultimately our system's really set up to drum those people out over time with process, as Shannon's described. But I was wondering if we could build off a base of wealth of knowledge out there that would help us educate us about what worked in the community, what they were doing, and what, as we consider trainings and, you know, continued convenings of sharing educational opportunities. You know, how do we make that happen? Is there another step along the way here?
Well, I can just say, just from my perspective, and I'm thinking particularly amongst the BIPOC community, I think some people are trying to just make the first step, trying to get in positions where they have venues and locations
Yeah.
where they can actually try to do the first thing.
Yeah.
So I think part of the process is what we're doing now, is just
Yeah.
creating platforms where we can get the understanding of the expectation, dispel as many of the untrue perspectives, create some systems of accountability where people feel confident that what we're saying is true in terms of, you know, we want everybody that wants to do business in Portland, particularly in this context, we want them to thrive. And so I think that's the biggest thing, you know, at least from my perspective right now, is getting, you know, BIPOC communities in a place where they feel, one, they have, you know, access to being able to, you know, have opportunities to have venues and do clubs and, you know, without feeling like they're targeted. And then the second thing is, you know, that system of accountability where they feel confident that the city really and its agencies really do have their best interests in mind. And it's not just a cliche statement. So I think, again, the more we have these opportunities and able to discuss that and get an understanding, get educated about the things, because just in this meeting, there's a lot of things that I, you know, was learning, you know, just listening to you guys talk about some of the codes and the expectation is like, wow, man. And I'm in my mind thinking, man, I know at least, you know, 10 or 15 people that I know that do events that if they knew this, it would kind of steer how they operate in a different direction, or they know the right questions to ask the venue owners, you know, because that's the unfortunate thing is that, you know, the musicians or artists or promoters are often at the tail end of the consequence because, one, they don't have any ownership, but, you know, they're brought in by venues and bars to put on these events. And so if, you know, and they're trusting that the venue owners are up to code and doing the right things. And if they're not, then usually, you know, they suffer the consequences, you know, of it. So, again, I can't say it enough. I appreciate you guys, you know, being willing to come to these platforms and share and educate people on it. And I think, you know, we're just at the beginning of it. So looking forward to it continuing.
I just want to pop in and say, like, on that level of asking what out there is happening that's working. I think Rob actually said something that really stuck with me early on about how, you know, it's like 80% or 90% of, you know, his day was not met with issue, right? It was checking in on positive things are happening and how, you know, he felt like the dad. And I do think, and that really stuck with me because I have a 9-year-old and I feel like, you know, all the drama in our relationship is obviously surrounding all the things that go wrong. You know, like, I feel like it takes a lot of intention to focus on the things that are working correctly. And I think that is something that's like some reflection I feel like all of us on this call and all of us listening at home can do, just in general, is like reflecting on the things that do work, as well as the thing, and because I know we focus a lot on the things that don't. But as you asked that question, I found myself thinking, you know, I honestly haven't taken the time mentally really to focus on that, what is working. And I think that's just, it's an interesting point to be made about trying to find that space in our brains to acknowledge the things that are difficult and also acknowledge the things that are are working in our favor and making us stronger as people. We do have a couple questions, and I think we should in the Q&A, and maybe we can get to those. Evan, did you have another one?
No, I just wanted to say too, like, you know, I know that I know that I ask a lot of questions and give you a little bit of a hard time, but as I'm from Portland, but I spent most of the last 15, 20 years living on the East Coast. And this conversation with people of your background and place in the state, this open conversation, would never in a million years happen in New York or in Pennsylvania, like unheard of, impossible. And so the fact that this is happening to me is a huge deal, and I'm so thankful. And it's something to really identify as a value of Oregon and the way that we think about, you know, public institutions here. So I just wanted to, after having peppered you with annoying questions, really raise that up there at the end.
I thank you for bringing that up and saying that. I think that this is definitely a positive step for our city. But you know, we're getting on in time, and I feel like, you know, that we could probably talk for hours and hours, but we shouldn't, because everyone's worked all day. So I would love to address these final two questions in the Q&A, and then maybe we can wrap it up for the evening. The first one is from Andre, following up on the conversation we were having about complaints and the OLCC responding to those complaints. He says, if the complaint is or might be generated by a biased complainer, how is the data used to assess the nature or intent of the complaint? There have been too many Black-owned clubs that have been negatively impacted by the complaint process for them all to be just due to cause. So, and that was something that I did notice too, when you were like, we respond when we have a complaint, and knowing that our world is rife with issues when it comes to race and bias out there. How is that something that, I mean, how do you?
The most important thing that we do, right? If there's credit, you know, there's certain, I think we had this conversation Shannon did last time, like, you got to have some credit, you know, it helps if the complaint has credibility in it, right? If it's not anonymous, someone's coming out, that's better than if it's anonymous. And we talked about that, but we also talked about the need for people to be anonymous, right? And that people wanted that protection. They might not be comfortable calling me, but they might be comfortable calling a hotline. I think the most important thing that my public safety folks do, Shannon and her crew do, is, you know, they go up and they follow up and they talk to the people involved. They try to, when they can, right? They get a sense of that, and they talk to the licensees and they talk to them, and that's what we got. And I think the demonstration of that was that rapping on the door by one of our folks that had disturbed the owner, and it was scary to her to have someone rapping on the door when it was not open. And I think, you know, you knew we followed up on it. That's what we do almost every time when these things happen and we get complaints and it is actionable. And at least, you know, that's not a guarantee, right? That you get it right or everyone's truthful, you get the right story, but it certainly helps to get around this thing, issues of bias and otherwise. You know, sometimes it's he said, she said, and you got nothing else to go on, and you know, you're there and you say, well, you know, we'd like to see this, you know, this problem not occur, right? And you warn people, or maybe you don't because you can't substantiate that. But that is the most important part of the process to me that they follow up on. It is the most useful to me as a director because I don't know, right? When I hear these, and that brings credibility at least to what we need to do in our job. And I think Shannon and her crew do a good job of that for us, for the agency. But, you know, Shannon, you have a lot more perspective on a lot more of those complaints, but I know I've always found that part to be quite useful.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add than what Steve talked about. In terms of the Black-owned clubs that have been negatively impacted, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that I think the question that's coming out of that is the number of complaints that are generated is because of the complaints that are coming in are because of the patrons of the club. And you know what? We take the complaints, but we look at them, and I can tell you, like I said, a lot of the complaints that we get, it's like, yeah. So my direction is that if I were a business owner and there's a complaint, no matter how far out there it is, I want to know about it. And so the direction to the inspectors is, if there are complaints on businesses, I want it tracked, and I want the inspectors need to communicate those complaints to the business owners, because if I was a business owner, I would want to know what those complaints are, no matter how far fetched and how far out there they are. And so, you know, some of them have a lot more weight than others. Some of them, it's just, like I said, a majority of what we do, we call it verbal instructions enclosed. Now, if we start getting complaints of fights and loud and disorderly activity, things of those nature, that's when we'll be like, okay, we're starting to see a pattern here. Let's have some education. And again, education, for the most part, closes with verbal instructions. And, you know, when we do issue a violation, especially for the busier locations, if we issue any type of violation for disorder or over service, it really shouldn't be a surprise to any of the businesses by the time we get to that point.
Yeah, I just want to add on an example of the work that Shannon's folks do in a charged social environment. So 4th of July last year, the governor called on OLCC to go out and become the mass police for all social distancing. That was when she started, and we went out and did 12, what was it? That 4th of July weekend was like 1,200 visits on bars. And we, you know, been doing that continuously all that time. Very challenging, because you got, you know, you got the maskers and you got the folks, and you have bars that can't control their patrons. And you go through all the verbal instructions that we work through with the businesses. And, you know, most of them by far, actually, we had really good compliance. So if there was a complaint, they went out. But if they didn't observe the violation, nothing happened. So we followed up on the complaints. And out of that, you know, there was just some intensity of obviously some places that were wantonly violating the governor's executive orders and what they had to carry out. And, you know, we were judicious in those, but, you know, we shut them down if they were not taking instruction. We would not shut them down. We can only take their liquor license. And some of them we moved to immediate suspension. I think after all of those, I can't lie, Shannon, you got the total of visitations. We were keeping track every week for the governor. It was amazing the amount of output these folks did. But yeah, I was really proud of the concerted effort, and I was proud of the people who responded to the instruction along the way, because they did, and then some didn't. And the ones, you know, we took them out and immediately suspended their license. I think I might be redundant from last time I was here a bit. You know, we had one that was sneaking people into the bar when they were supposed to be closed in Salem here. And there's a violation, and we caught up with them and gave them the business and shut them down. But we settled with them before the governor reopened, and they had been closed for time. And we counted that, and we got them back in business when the governor reopened. They took a violation, they took their medicine, and they moved on. And they've operated fine since then. So anyway, Shannon, you have the numbers, but it amazed me how much work they did. But what most amazed me is in that charged environment, we had a system that handled it pretty well.
Andre mentioned something in the chat that I thought was interesting about how his question is, we live in a time where data is accessible to track over time trends and outcomes. Is data being used to discern these patterns, or are the patterns being generated primarily from complaints? So Shannon, when you're talking about, you know, when we see a pattern, is that pattern is it a mixture of complaints, or is it like where is that coming from?
Yeah, when I say patterns, so like say I'm a district inspector for downtown Portland, and I was for several years, that's where Rob and I met. You know, so for example, there's a particular business, I start getting police reports peppered with citizen complaints, peppered with neighborhood bars complaining about a business. It's the regional and the inspector, the district inspector. When I say pattern, it's what's happening on a consistent basis. It's really from the history of the business and what the inspector has done. And then say I left that district and another inspector came in, they simply go look at the history of the business and kind of get an idea of what's going on and see if they've received previous complaints like that before. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, all this stuff is happening on a Saturday or a Friday. We should probably pull the employees that are working those days and let's have a training. So for example, let me just use this. There were a lot of Deweys one year coming out of the Rose Garden, primarily during Blazer games. I think this was right after Steve Marks came on board. Yeah. And so, you know, there were a lot of Deweys coming out of there. And so I had over 2 days, every single server in the Rose Garden, I provided training to the staff. And you know what? The Deweys went down and they really started watching what they were doing. And it really helped. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. We're hitting our time. Big Wino did have a quick question also in the Q&A. Is there an organization that does enforce violations against BIPOC or genre discrimination for venues? If you were to experience that, who would you address? While I don't think that there is a specific organization that exists outside of MusicPortland LEAP, I would eventually like it to be that these conversations, what we're doing here, we establish connections and ways to support our community if these things are happening, that we can help direct you to the right people to talk to about that, whether it's within the organization itself, whether it's an OLCC issue, whether it's directing you to Shannon or Stephen, or something else. I think that the goal here with what the work LEAP is doing is to help assist all those conversations, even if there isn't like a governmental body that does that within our city. So I hope that helps a little bit. But on that note, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Unless you people have any closing comments.
Yeah, I just had one thing that I wanted to add before we close up, is for people to keep in mind that a lot of the venues, like smaller venues, they're just done. They closed and they are no more. So as some of these folks are just getting into the business and trying to establish themselves, a lot of them are going to be dealing with brand new owners and brand new clubs, and they're going to be completely reinventing some wheels. And even though I'm retired, I look at it as the city is still paying me, and I've got 4 years of expertise that I'm happy to share, and then help people negotiate the restart process, because it's going to be a little rocky, not only with the bar and club owners, but with some of the regulatory agencies too. People will change positions. The police department, fire department, OLCC. You're going to be seeing people who are just getting their feet wet, and so yeah, I'm just happy to offer my services, to anybody who'd like it.
That's really wonderful, Rob. Thank you. I think that's great. I think that one of our next moves in LEAP is to create a space for all of this information to live, for our community to be able to tap in and out as they need to know that these resources are available to them, that there are people within these agencies that are available to them, to support them as we move forward. I think that is a pretty important mission for us that is being highlighted as we continue these conversations. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Rob for the first time, Shannon, Stephen, Eben again. We are so grateful that we are able to have these talks, and I feel really, really energized and excited. You know, I think that this is a big steps for all of us and for the Portland music scene and for the BIPOC Portland music scene. And I really look forward to continuing them with you all. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. OG,
Thank
you
you.
wanna have any closing, anything, any notes?
No, I say the same thing, you guys. Again, these are just the start, and I'm hoping that we can continue to build and bring some other elements involved with this process as well. Just again, my hopes is that, you know, one of the goals is to be able to come up with that checklist of sorts where people can, you know, particularly you know, artists and promoters can have this checklist where they can make sure that as they're putting events together and working with venues and things like that, there's a checklist that they can go down and say, okay, and make sure I got this in order, make sure that I know this. So, you know, it keeps them accountable, but also if they're ever running into various, you know, agencies that are there whose job is to make sure things are running right, they can be able to, you know, show this type of checklist and say, hey, I've done everything that, you know, is required here, you know, and so, you know, hopefully that, you know, becomes that, and we can get more of our community, particularly our BIPOC community that have had some of these communication barriers, to come to the table and build some of the relationships with you guys. So again, we can kind of take some of the we can put some faces to, you know, to some of the positions that they hear, and kind of break some of those walls down. So again, I appreciate each and every one of you guys and look forward to continue the building with you guys.
Yes. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for spending
Thank you.
third Thursday of every month with us for 2 hours now for the second time in a row. But these talks are so great and so important. So thank you for spending your time. And until next time, see you soon.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
good night.
Take care, guys.
Later.